Tell you a little story. Linda Gojak is the current president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Linda's from Ohio, and she and I Kathy knows the story because I told her over breakfast. We're having this discussion about the differences and similarities between fluency and mastery and proficiency. And I was saying that I was giving this talk in Common Core in math today. And she immediately came back to me and she said, and did a lot of talks about the Common Core, but didn't know you went to the Catholic Church to deliver them. This is, how it's issues MA. I'm going to sort of start about something that Kathy did, which is the practices, and that in this particular slide kind of aligns those with, as you see, the NCTM processes and also the proficiency notions about adding it up. And then I'm going to sort of get you engaged in doing some stuff. So hopefully when you came in, you picked up some stuff. You picked up the grade 4 Common Core State Standards. You picked up, or should have, a one sheet that's back in front that has an activity, and I should give credit where credit's due. NCTM co-published, and actually Tim Canel, recent past president of NCS, and National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics, and some people would sort of help review this. A series of books on the Common Core. The 3.5 book is out, and the 22 book is out, and the middle school book is coming in the fall, and the high school book is out. There's a book for leaders that was released last week. So we'll pick up from there. We'll use some of these resources and kind of move forward. But before we do any of that, let me get a sense of what you're doing. How many of you either just finished teaching or will go back to teaching children in the fall? Okay. How many of you are math supervisors? How many of you are math resource teachers, specialists, coaches, instructional leaders, however yours is defined? Okay. How many of you are principals? How many of you are assistant superintendents? How many of you are something else? Okay, that's got a number of something else. All right. So welcome to all of you, and I'll try to. She kept saying, "Well, he's going to talk about this." I'm thinking, really? It's important to know that the practices were sort of born from taking what NCTM had done way back in 1989, and if you will, the grade book, curriculum evaluation standards. Followed that up with principles and standards, and also the adding it up report. So they came differently. But what's unique about the practices, and I raise this issue often, is the language here. Because this is observable language. For those of you who are assistant supes and or principals, you can think about walking into a classroom and looking for, is that teacher attending to precision? Are those activities which are engaging kids, looking at precision, looking at modeling mathematics, looking at and using particular tools or what have you? So the language gives us some opportunities here. As a longtime member of NCTM, past president of NCTM, it's sort of, it's like, why didn't we think about that? That's nicer language than this. It just says problem solving, could have said more. Hindsight's always 20/20. So that's kind of interesting in terms of how that plays out. Clearly, first of all, let's put this in perspective. Kathy noted, and you did a good job there in deciding which states weren't in the mix. 47 states, that's huge. Frankly, the biggest thing about the Common Core standards is the word common. For the first time in the history of this country, somebody could move from Georgia to Massachusetts, and they will have done the same mathematics. God, isn't that unique? And doesn't that make sense? And by the way, intentionally, these are not called national standards. Intentionally, these are not called federal standards. Are you kidding me? That's the last thing that we want to do is make this political. Because in fact, people on both sides of the aisle went for this in a lot of ways. And also, in fact, I don't have to tell you this, for a long time, Massachusetts felt their standards were better. And it was somewhat of a tough sell to have Massachusetts sign on to the Common Core. And I know all of the politics, and that's not the intent of this talk. So that's, the uniqueness is that this is common. And here's a great starting point. Everywhere I go, people are talking about the practices. As ragged as this implementation is, and believe me, it's ragged. I was at a venue 2 weeks ago, bigger than this, and one of the first questions I said was, how many of you ever heard of NCTM? How many of you are NCTM members? And when 3 hands went up in an audience of about 150, I knew it was in big trouble. Now, I happen to know, because people have been telling me, that you're way further along than that. So the notion of the practices and how they connect and so forth are pretty important. But one of the things I wanted to sort of set up in terms of what I want to do is sort of think about some of the things I'm going to do as stuff that you might consider in the name of professional development as you engage your faculties, as you engage people that you work with, and so forth. So the first shot of this is a discussion around the practices. And what we're going to look at here is, we're not going to do this times 8. How many of you know what a wordle is? Okay, a bunch of you. If you haven't seen it, that's a wordle. It basically, it picks up language and you throw it into a program and it gives you frequency. So what this does, for frankly one of the easier statement practices to discuss, because most people have a notion about problem solving, partly from the work of NCTM for 20 plus years, the Wordle provides you with a discussion document. You can talk about the frequency of how problem pops in different ways in this particular practice. You can talk about solution. You can talk about students being around it and problems and so forth, and get a sense of driving a discussion about the role of problem solving, in whether it's a cross-grade level group, whether it's the entire faculty or what have you. Similarly, you can do that with others. I picked on the third one because when we talk about, there are two reasoning practices that kind of come together, reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, and this one that sort of gets at construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. 12 years ago when NCTM wrote the principles and standards, we were nervous about using the word argument because we were fearful that teachers would get the impression that kids would be having fisticuffs over the mathematics that they were doing or what have you. For those of you who work with mathematicians have arguments all the time. It's part of the culture. So argument here is really being able to say, here's my strategy. This is what I did for this particular problem, and it's okay to get pushback. Now, having said that, and if you think about it for a minute, I would suggest to you that any classroom lesson is probably going to get the first 3 practices. That kids ought to be engaged in problem solving every time they touch mathematics. They ought to have an opportunity to discuss their reasoning, and they ought to be able to sort of document that reasoning, whether it's abstractly or quantitatively. I think those are big time hits. Almost every classroom lesson. You can think about that yourself, and feel free to push back if we get a break to do that. But the notion of, and here's the hard thing, making sure that classroom environment is comfortable enough, safe enough, and frankly the norms are such that I can disagree with that kid who's sitting next to me, that I can have that argument, and it's okay. And for a whole lot of people who frankly are not in this room, that's a hard thing to do. Because we're talking about experience, we're talking about understanding the mathematics, we're talking about classroom norms, rules, and how you run your classroom, which gets into behavioral management to some extent, and so forth and so on. So this allows you to have that discussion and sort of think about argument and so forth. Model with mathematics, similarly. I neglected to say that one of the things I do now is run a Brook Hill Foundation supported project. It's a national project for math specialists and teacher leaders. And so my colleagues and I, John Ray, and the newly elected member of the NCTM Board of Directors, and Beth Cobat, do a lot of work in the name of problem solving. And we've been doing this for a while. I happen to be one of the writers of the Common Core State Standards, and so we've been through this before it even was released in a formal way. And we always had trouble with this one. And frankly, we had trouble with 7 and 8, sort of thinking about that, what's that look like, and so forth. Look for it, make use of structure, and one of the things that sort of worked well for us to get a sense of driving this discussion is what I'm going to play you. And you can see the language here. What we wanted to do is get teachers to think about structure as it plays out in an elementary classroom. And for those of you who are not familiar, you're going to be listening to a live scribe discussion of Maya here, who's a 3rd grader. As soon as I can get her up. I'm not going to play all of this because it's going to take a little bit longer than one.
My question is, how many ways can you name or represent 52?
Okay. Well, you can represent 52 with 52 ones, which would be a lot. And you could do 5 tens and 2 ones like this.
Okay.
Or you could do a bunch of ones. 8, 4, 5, 8. That would be also multiplications of 5 times 5 plus.
Interesting.
And you could also represent it by bring 52.
Okay.
Or you could do 50 plus. There are a lot more than that.
You want to give me a couple more?
Well, you could do 49 plus 3.
What made you think of 49 plus 3?
Because if you do 50 plus 2 and you subtract 1, to make 52, it would be 1 more to add. So that's 3.
Okay.
And I'm going to equal 52.
Anything else?
20 plus 4 times 5 plus equals 50 plus 52.
Nice. Nice.
Or the other way around, 5 times 10 equals 50 plus 2 equals 2. Like that.
Very nice.
So Maya goes from essentially counting through different ways to express 52 in terms of place value, all the way to multiplication. And if we think about that particular practice, look for and make use of structure. For those of you who've been thinking about this for a while, here's where we get number sense. Here's where we can have and focus on composing and decomposing number in a variety of ways, and getting kids to be really flexible in using numbers in terms of connecting back to the content. So that's really important. And 8, by the way, I would argue to you that as you think about, or suggest to you that as you think about your teachers working with the practices, 7 and 8 are a little bit harder in terms of actually the obvious looks of this. Look for and make use of and express regularity and repeated reasoning. Obviously, that gets a pattern and so forth, but it also gets into various ways to also connect to various topics within mathematics, maybe more so as grade levels rise, which is another thing to think about, and that is certain practices will play out more readily because of the mathematics that children are involved with, and also because of their developmental level. So that's something that that you need to think about in your own professional development and with the professional development of your staff as they move through this. And then I guess one more thing. I'm probably going to come back to this a couple times because I'm beginning to hear this, as people talk about the practices and the content standards. And that is, these are not divorced. In other words, you could argue that the practices are mathematics. And similarly, to learn the content, you engage, your children engage in the practices and or teachers develop it. So there is Kathy's slide here that showed the intersect relative to these, I think is very important. Kathy mentioned that Pearson has come up with an observation tool. One of the things that my project has done for a couple years now is create, and I don't expect anybody to be able to read that, it's just a kind of a placeholder, is create what we call look-fors. In other words, because of the language of the mathematical practices, school administrators, math specialists, math coaches, what have you, you ought to be able to co-plan with teachers and think about those practices and what you might look for, both in what kids are doing and what teachers might be doing. That's something that actually we developed a number of years ago, and I'm going to show you some varieties of this. There are three major writers, if you will, of the Common Core State Standards. Bill McCallum from the University of Arizona, who's also responsible for the Progressions Project, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the Illustrative Math Task, which are also up and running, and at least one person in this room is involved with that. Jason Zimba, who's one of you. He's from Vermont and Bennington College, and was involved as a major writer at Phil Darrow. So those three people sort of headed up all this work, and people fed language into them and so forth. And I mentioned McCallum for one reason, because I'm going to talk about him with this slide and others. And I also mentioned Zimba because he's local and very involved right now on a consulting basis with the Park assessments. And we'll hopefully have a little time to talk about that later. So one of the things McCallum has done recently, and this is, this is what Bill does, he's a good thinker. He's sort of reorganized the practices. And what he's done here is talk about these two practices as overarching, make sense of problem solving and persevering solving and attentive precision, kind of linked up with, if you will, the two reasoning practices, the two structure practices, and the two modeling practices. So it's just kind of a different way to look at those. And we're finding that some of the observation tools that are coming out are using that paradigm, and that's just for your information. And again, as you work with teachers, you may want to think about this one. But I want to go back and do sort of what I said a few minutes ago, and that is make sure that we think about the practices as mathematics. So I'm just going to take one practice, and in this case it's modeled with mathematics, and just give you a couple situations where, well, how does that connect to the content? Well, this is language directly from the practice. Apply the mathematics students know to solve problems arising in everyday life, society, and so forth. Mathematics is modeled in solving problems as solution strategies emerge, and as a problem solution is represented mathematically. From the practice, writing an addition equation to describe a situation. That's an example that was provided. Math is modeled with expressions, for instance, 4x plus 5, equations 4x plus 5 equals 17, inequalities, and so forth. So there's opportunities, again, as you think about your teachers working here, making that connection. Yes, it's important that children model with mathematics. How might they be doing that? Frankly, anytime they're writing an expression, anytime they're writing an equation, anytime they use a graph to sort of depict the mathematics, they're doing modeling with mathematics. You could argue that many, many days in an instructional year, that practice is going to be invoked in terms of what kids are doing. Here's another flip, okay? And this flip sort of says that, as you think about practices, they're not always standalone practices. In other words, practices sort of cross over with each other. So I've taken the practice model with mathematics and sort of thought, okay, how does that link up with others? Well, if you will, the problems, I refer to this as the problem-solving practice. All students are engaged in problem solving. As students are engaged in problem solving, they're applying mathematics to a context or a situation. Additionally, their solution will often be a number sense equation or inequality, all mathematical models. So, when kids are doing problem solving, partly because of what they're going to provide, they're modeling with mathematics. So there's a connection here. Connecting to the two reasoning practices, reasoning engages students in thinking mathematically and representing their thinking mathematically through written or oral use of mathematical representation. So as students present, if you will, the reasoning, it is often a mathematical model. and I'll just do one more, attend to precision. Students intending to precision will examine whether a mathematical solution to a problem, should be a singular, is reasonable, needs to be precise, or is best as an estimate. So your model, thinking about your model, well, should it be an exact answer, should it be an estimate, that kind of thing. And again, the point here is, yes, kids are engaged in a particular practice, but those practices kind of intersect with each other as they actually play it out. So I think that it's important that teachers have an opportunity to have those kinds of discussions. Some resources that you may want to think about, some of these you may be aware of. Inside Mathematics, and you can just Google it. For those of you who are active members of the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics, if you just go to their site, I'm pretty sure it's connected right there. There's videotape, there's lessons, and so forth. What you'll find in many of these sites is essentially existing stuff that has been sort of fitted to the Common Core State Standards. So again, as you think about professional development for your staff, I'm not going to claim, by the way, that these are 4-star, 5-star recommendations. I'm going to claim that these are fairly popular. The Hunt Institute and the Chief Council of State School Officers have put together Common Core implementation videos. And they, I'm going to give a little editorial on this. So these are talking heads, and it's always dangerous when you have somebody that's standing there talking. But the good thing is they're short. So for instance, McCallum does a really good job about claiming why the Common Core State Standards are important, partly because of the word common. And so it's not like it's 15 minutes of him droning on. It might be something that you can get away with your faculty, if you're doing a faculty in service and so forth and so on. Again, because of the brevity and the fact, and there's others out there. They are seemingly, by the way, let's go with some caution into the wind here. Stuff is popping up every day. Okay, so that's simultaneously good and bad, right? Because some of it's crap. So just be aware about that. One of the things that I've been involved with very indirectly is this thing. It's a Common Core app. It's called Common Core Look Fors. It's based on the stuff that I was telling you about earlier. It's available for the iPad or the iPhone. And basically what it allows, if you want to go into your principal, what have you want to go in and you want to look for, in this case I've put up Make Sense of Problems and Persevering Solving, and you can actually look for statements and click on that. You'll get a graph. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, and one of the worst things you can possibly do is show something that seems to be about a square centimeter in size, and you're way in the back there, you have no idea what the hell I'm doing here. But it's an iPad app that you may want to think about and so forth, and so I'm not trying to sell it at all. It's constantly being revised. Again, the idea is sort of connecting that to the content, which is sort of where we're about to go next. I want to sort of end what I want to say relative to the practices with the following, and that is, and I'm seeing this happen in lots of places around the country, and I know that with our math specialists, we're using this a lot, and that is, as teachers plan lessons, we're basically asking, okay, how are you engaging the practices in that lesson plan? How are kids engaged with, I'm picking on Model with Mathematics, in this particular lesson? How would Model with Mathematics as a practice play out in some sort of formative assessment, or the kinds of formative assessments that you would routinely have in lessons? I mean, the point we're trying to make is that as you think about planning and teaching and ongoing assessment through that lesson, how are the practices engaging kids? And frankly, how are you thinking about the practices? How does it sort of alter your planning? And I think that's a worthwhile discussion with faculty, because if you think about it, if you think about this, the practices as habits of mind, as kids develop mathematically, they're more routinely going to be engaged and in fact be aware of that they're modeling with mathematics. I'm not claiming that 7-year-olds will, but 15-year-olds sure will, and that's the sort of development that goes along with the practices. So and again, I think reinforces that the fact that the practices really are content. So we want to move to kind of what Kathy said, and that's the domains of the Common Core State Standards. And what we're looking at here is, here's a particular standard at grade 3, which is a two-step problem-solving stuff, and so forth. And you could argue, you know, this standard involves a problem-solving practice and so forth. You could think about how we're doing that, and maybe a discussion is, what's that look like? What's the activity in my classroom? As you have a cross-grade level discussion, as you have only the third grade teachers in the room, thinking about how that plays out is the kind of discussion that probably many of your buildings are ready for. But let's kind of get more direct into that. Kathy alluded to this, and so I'm not going to mention much about this other than to reinforce what she said. If there's any major change in the elementary grade standards, it's the emphasis relative to fractions. A lot of stuff has come down in the grades. One of the handouts that you picked up when you came in the room was a white paper that I did for Pearson on fractions. And what I did with that is take, and this is a great case of holding up something that you can't read intentionally, and I'm going to lie. Because I was going to tell you, this is the IES fraction report. It actually isn't. It's a problem-solving report. But the IES did a report on fractions that looked at research around fractions. And the thing that has my picture on it, I took that report and linked it up with a Common Core. So for those of you specifically who are doing some stuff on fractions and you see fractions as a real sort of professional development need at grades 3 through 5, and by the way, everybody in the room ought to see that. That's probably useful. That and that IES report are probably useful for you to consider. Kathy also alluded to these sets of standards, and you know, how many people in your middle grade teachers? 6, 7, 8. Okay, so your life truly will change as you implement this. I mean, it's a heavy algebra-ish curriculum, more so than before. And by the way, you're going to be talking a lot about what those 5th grade teachers didn't provide you with, because in many cases you're not going to be able to do this stuff yet because they don't have the stuff that's coming to you. So that's something we'll get into later as well. So she didn't directly say this, but she sort of did, and this is, you know, my sort of unfair characterization about the Common Core. I mean, come on. When we wrote the focal points in 2005, published in 2006. Kathy showed you that slide that had Florida with 89 objectives at the 4th grade level. Trust me, there were states, I won't name them, that had over 100 objectives at the 4th grade level. Nobody living could do that. So the notion that this is common, and frankly there are fewer, is a big deal. I mean, the easiest to help about this for somebody who's been sort of beleaguered with seemingly a zillion standards is, you know what? You only got 33 this year. Are you kidding me? I can do that. Now, unfortunately, that's unfair. Because what people will also say is, you know what, I'm done by like October. That's good. So therefore, you really need to read them. You really need to get at some of the issues that she said. But because I think that the issue is that less is more. Because this ought to say to the teacher once he or she gets underneath these, wow, you're really expecting a lot of me. But guess what? There are fewer of them. So you ought to have time to do it, if you will, right for the first time in your career. Because what we've done is a very shallow skim over a curriculum of seemingly a zillion objectives in order to get ready for the assessments that we have in March or April. I live in Maryland, and our state curriculum for the longest time was called the voluntary state curriculum. It was about as voluntary as death. I mean, everybody had to use that curriculum because the state test was built around it. And by the way, this is sort of the same, except that people can add stuff, as you well know. So, you know, that's one thing. The less is more thing, I think, is really important. How many are high school teachers? Okay, so this little slice of this is for you, and that is, this is organized in terms of conceptual categories. It's also set up, the Common Core is set up that if kids really go through and do what's there through grade 7, they ought to be able to do something called algebra in grade 8. And as you know, that train has left the barn in this country a long time ago. A whole lot of kids do something called algebra in grade 8, and frankly, more and more of them are doing something called algebra in grade 7. So the notion of preparation for that and the notion of a pretty diverse high school curriculum is there as well, ordered accordingly. So we want to move now to sort of this notion about transitioning to the Common Core, and the content things that we'll talk about, to some extent reinforcing at least one of these from Kathy's presentation, are sort of beginning points of considering the mathematics. And the first one, that, you know, and again, she talked about this in different ways. I can't say enough about how important place value is. You know, Kathy was saying to you, well, yeah, it's the first year in the book, let's get over that and get to the real stuff. If kids don't have an understanding of place value, forget it. You know, if kids can't do what that kid did on the livestock, tear a number apart in different ways, and take it all the way from counting to, if you will, which she had 3 different operations in there that I allowed you to see, and I cut that. Then there isn't that sense of number that will allow you a level of fluency and proficiency with operations and so forth. So place value is the building block, clearly. Operations takes a lot of our time, and you know, it's important to build, as she also indicated, an understanding around those. And then we mentioned fractions. There's a new report that actually maybe you saw because it's got a lot of national window about a week ago. Bob Sigler from Carnegie Mellon University, who was actually the lead writer of that IES fraction report that I alluded to that's referenced in that thing that I wrote, did a correlational study about what is it that kids ought to have to be successful in algebra. And 2 things came up. One was, well, maybe not surprising, division and fraction. Division kind of got me. Now, it's correlational, and some people, you know, something knows it at correlational kinds of research. But it does say that here are successful kids in algebra, and here are those who aren't. The ones who were not successful, weren't particularly good, never had success with division, whole number division, and work with fractions. For those of you who are high school teachers, you should be nodding your head relative to fractions. Every time I ask high school teachers about issues around algebra, issues around fractions always pops. And not just A over B fractions, but proportionality in particular and how that leads to algebra. So that's pretty key, and all of these are really important foundationally. The critical areas, right now, you have in your hands the grade 4 Common Core State Standard, so if you'll take a look at that for a moment. In the very first paragraph at the top of the page, you'll see language around the critical areas for that particular grade level. And there are 3 or 4 of these critical areas for each grade within the Common Core. This is just grade 7. You don't have 7, you only have 4. That's intentional. And the reason I'm presenting this is here are the grade 7 critical areas. They're the grade 7 focal points. NCTM published the focal points in 2006. It and the National Math Panel and a few other things helped get this training started in the name of Common Core. So for people who are comfortable with, familiar with the focal points, this becomes an easy sell. Okay, it's right there. It says these are the most important things at your particular grade level. Do those. They come directly from the focal points. I know that because Seville Beckman and I wrote this section of it, and as Kathy said, there's a little bit of juggling. You'll notice that there were 4 for grade 7, so we pulled one of the contributing content areas for the grade 7 into the mix for grade 7, and sometimes they're exactly the focal points. In some cases, there's one from the other areas added and so forth. But it's an easy point of discussion in terms of what's important to the 3rd grade teacher, the 2nd grade teacher, the 1st grade teacher, and so forth. So that's point 1 in terms of doing this. Another thing that she alluded to, and I'm going to say a little bit more directly, look at the language here. This is grade 4, generalized place value understanding. All I'm doing here is highlighting understanding. And you have it right in front of you, so you can see that. So under number and operations base 10, under number and operations fractions, under measurement and data, you can see the word understand, lots of places. Okay? You have it right in front of you, so I'm not going to have you do that piece of it. But the point there is the importance of understanding. The next point that I'm going to raise, and I'm going to have you take a look at this, is that throughout the Common Core State Standards, there is direct language. It's not alluded to. It says very directly, represent fractions on a limited line diagram in grade 3. Using equations, rectangular arrays, and/or area models, grade 4. Using cubic centimeters, cubic inches, cubic feet, and improvised units in grade 5, and so forth. So, just for a minute, look through the content for grade 4 that's right in front of you, and look for representations, whether that's a number line, whether that's an area model, whether that's some other sort of diagram, a particular measurement tool, or what have you. I'm just going to give you a minute to just cruise through that to get a sense of that. Find some of that? So the point I want to make, and whether you like it or not, partially because of the fact that you're seated right where you are, in many cases you're going to be leading this professional development for your teachers. And some of you know right now that, you know what, I know my teachers are not using number line. I know they have no idea what an area model is. I know that when we use do this particular mathematics, they don't use that particular representation. So it becomes pretty important in terms of the point. That's kind of what we just did. The point that Kathy made, and that point is, if we want kids to understand the mathematics and engage those representations, there are a couple things that have to happen. One is, there's time is really needed to do that. Time is needed to sort of be comfortable with those representations, get to a level of understanding. I mean, it takes a while for us to understand stuff. I mean, if we think about our lives, we can use examples. But if we think about our lives in terms of understanding, getting to, oh yeah, I understand that finally. I had to screw it up like 5 times before I get it now. So it takes time to do that. Stuff here means, don't expect me to use these materials if I don't have them. So for the assistant superintendents in the room, the principals and so forth, if you expect teachers to use manipulative materials, then, we've got to pony up and get them. And people need to know when the appropriate use of that stuff occurs. But it seems to me that the amount of time we dedicate and the materials we have to do it will get you the depth thing. Because the point I want to make here is conceptual understanding is not an option here, it's an expectation. Because you'll see the word understanding throughout the Common Core State Standard. That's why there's fewer of them. Because you can get to a level of proficiency, if you will, a level of understanding that will allow them to march on to later grades. So that's important. You also have a one-sheet that has basically a double side. And on that first side, actually it comes from the Common Core math books I alluded to earlier that NCTM and Solution Tree co-published. But look at the 4th grade and just let's talk about this. How many of you here, by the way, here either have experience or are 4th grade teachers? Okay, good. So you guys are like the experts, whether you like it or not. So not just you, but anybody in the room, look at the 4th grade comment and cherry pick any way you want. Again, we're going to give you about a minute because of time. And tell me what you think might be challenging for either, and you can take either of the following 2 perspectives. 4th grade teachers in terms of teaching it, and or 4th grade kids in terms of learning it, if you want to divide those up, or if you think they're the same. In fact, kids might have trouble learning it, but the teacher might be fine, or my teachers really need content background to do that. Either way you want to go with that. On this sheet that says thinking about what is important, it's number 3, and it's just the challenging part that we're doing. The rest of this might be useful to you at some other time. Who wants to start? What do you think? What's going to be challenging at the 4th grade level for teachers or kids? Yes?
Generalizing your ideas about place value
Generalizing ideas about place value.
versus calling them by name.
Right. Okay. And there, by the way, there's a nice connection right back to the practices, right? Because the kind of reasoning you use about that generalization kind of gets you that nice practice connection. What else might be challenging for kids and or teachers? Decimal notation. Okay. Get engaged with decimals at that level, so thinking about, yeah.
Using unit fractions.
Using unit fractions. Okay. Working from unit fractions and moving that forward in the 4th grade. I mean, frankly, if you've not taught 4th grade before, or frankly, if you have taught 4th grade, if you look at the stuff under fractions, there's a lot of that is brand new to the 4th grade here, right? Yeah. What else might be challenging? Yes?
Letting go of things that were previously part of.
Yeah, you hear that, Kathy? Letting go. So yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I had this cool unit. It's not there anymore. Yes, you're right. It's not there. Move on. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Recognize, I hear this from the middle school teachers.
Yeah.
Recognizing that improper fractions are division.
Yeah.
Recognition of that.
The whole notion of fractions as division, you know, regardless of whether it's improper or not. Yeah. Okay. You could argue, speaking very directly to the principals and others, administrators in the room, that the 4th and 5th grade faculty members really need to know a lot of mathematics, and you might want to be careful about who's teaching math at those grade levels, talking very slowly on purpose, because that's a load. I would argue, by the way, that 5th is heavier. You guys can debate that. So, I mean, notions about that, and we won't do anything more here on this page. But the page here is kind of a setup for something you might want to think about relative to professional development around content. And it goes along with what's important at that grade level. And by the way, sometimes stuff is challenging. That's why I use the word challenging. Because frankly, it's always been challenging. You know, there's a lot of stuff on this 4th grade Common Core, this stuff that 4th grade teachers have done for years, right? Those of you who are in 4th grade know that. And so therefore, it's always been challenging. There's some stuff here that's challenging, frankly, it's just new, or misinterpreted, or what have you. So you have that conversation along with what's familiar, what's new, and so forth. What might you change? How you identify changes? Do a comparison between the current curriculum and the existing curriculum to see where things pop and so forth. So you can have that kind of an analysis content-wise. Anything else that you'd be concerned about relative to your faculty? You're all leaders now, so you know. Nobody, what was that? Yeah, say more.
Well, we've went from our math classes to 42 minutes right now in 6th grade.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you're in middle school. Yeah. So nationally, this is a big issue. Nationally, I see this all the time, that elementaries, for some reason, have found ways to steal time. I know what you're doing, by the way. You're shortcutting social studies, for sure. And the next generation science standards haven't come out yet, so you got a little bit of a window there. So you're pulling from them. I know exactly what you're doing. And God forbid you touch reading. We spend days on that time. So what happens is I see, I'm doing a graduate student finishing her thesis where in her building she's got 9 minutes. Right? 9 minutes for great math every day. She's got 42 minutes, okay? And that happens a lot at the middle school level because they're packing in all those subjects. It's not that they don't like math. The math supervisor's probably going crazy. How am I going to implement this stuff with 42 minutes of time and kids not having the prerequisites to do that middle school mathematics curriculum that I just showed was heavy, heavy, heavy. So that's a big challenge. And you know, and if you have anybody in authority in this room, maybe I'll talk to them about that, ways to do that. But you know, there's stuff there that you can't control, bus schedules. lunch, because they have to go to music and art, all that other kind of stuff, which is diluting the time thing. The elementary, we write about stuff, but we can mess around with the time thing a lot easier than we can at the middle school level. What she's citing is a major problem in middle schools around this country. So you're not alone, but it's not good. So that other issues that you see. Anybody else? Yes?
Transition.
The transition from to. Yeah. For 2 years, I use the following phrase, that people are doing what I refer to as Common Core Plus. Because they're trying to move into the Common Core Plus, they have, if you will, the old stuff. You have the old stuff because you're using the existing tests for X years. So, and it's easier to sort of hang on to the old stuff. Oh, I still have to do it because we still have that test. And so you're not getting that person to dump it when maybe you could or should. So yeah, you have what you could arguably say is a bigger curriculum for this period of time before the PARC assessments roll in. So that's a challenge too for everybody. And it's timed in a different way. Okay, so one of the things I also wanted us to see is flow. And by flow I mean is how key concepts like go across the years. And so for instance, and this isn't perfect, but here's represent and solve problems involving addition, subtraction. There's one standard on that, and you notice how it grows up with multiplication, division in grade 3. Here's essentially the addition, subtraction facts in grade 2, and now the multiplication, division facts in grade 3. Here's equal groups and objects for foundations for multiplication, and here's your moving to the properties. And by the way, the numbers are the number of standards. Okay. Here's problem solving with 4 operations. Here's problem solving with 4 operations, 2 objectives here, 3 objectives here. Here's factors and multiples. Here's patterns and relationships. By the way, for those of you who have taught for a while and sort of, if I said to you number theory, that to you would mean factors and prime numbers and composites and stuff like that. That's one of those things that hasn't been totally thrown out, but there's not nearly the level of emphasis that maybe you saw heretofore. So that's the slice on operations. If you look at number and operations base 10, here's 5 standards on place value in grade 2. Here's generalizing place value understanding for multi-digit whole numbers and 3 standards in grade 4. Here's place value, 5 standards in grade 5. Here's properties. Notice how properties are picked up here and here and here and here. It changes in terms of the mathematics, addition, subtraction, multi-digit arithmetic, whole numbers and decimals to hundredths. So you're now moving, that becomes a pretty heavy standard at the grade 3 level. So that, as you think about your faculty sort of understanding this, looking at something like this, because frankly, you know what happens. We're the 3rd grade people, we're only talking to ourselves, and we gripe about it a lot. What they do in 2nd grade? Not much, because I got to pick up all this. So if people got a chance to kind of see what led, how it goes, and oh, by the way, these people in 5th grade are waiting for you to do this, so make sure you pick up that. And so that notion of flow across the grades is probably worthwhile time. I'm not going to spend any significant amount of time on other of these except for the fraction piece to show you 7 objectives here on fractions. You can do the counting. Here's 12. Here's 11. Picking up on understanding fractions of numbers. Here's equivalence. Here's moving from equivalence to addition, subtraction fractions. Here's work with using unit fractions to pick up on how that applies then to multiplication, division fractions. Here's connecting it to decimals, and I think we've talked a lot about fractions and so forth. Sort of a related discussion, but differently, and that is how the math, because we looked about what might lead from one grade level to the next, but then you also have to say, well, what's that look like across a marking period or across 4 marking periods or what have you, because that's something that you're doing now as a district and or your state is doing and so forth. And this is interesting because, for instance, this is basically the equivalent fraction standard for grade 4. Okay. So questions like, okay, when are we going to do this? I'm guessing we're not going to start out 4th grade here doing that. because the kids were like wilting in the seats, and you haven't done the standard place value unit, right? So where does that play out? How much time do I spend on that? What kind of formative assessments might the district sort of create and so forth? Those are hard questions, and you may not be ready for them yet. And I'll come to rollout here in a minute, but that's a discussion topic. Similar, here's another one. Solve word problems involving distance, direction, fraction, referring, same, whole, and so forth and so on. You could argue that the solve word problem stuff, as soon as the kids do that in mathematics, they'll be doing that regularly from that point on through the rest of the year. So the word problem stuff maybe has a flow, if you will, across, once they get it, from that marking period on in terms of amount of time and so forth and so on. On the other hand, here's something that is essentially rounding, okay? Rounding to the nearest, round multi-digit whole numbers to any place, but it builds off the grade 3 activity. That doesn't take you far less time. That's a couple of lessons. So the point here is the size of these standards differ. The first two I showed you were whoppers. They'll take a lot of time. You'll be engaged with in that stuff, equivalent fractions if you're a 4th grade teacher, for a lot of days. But to what extent do you space that out? Do you get that all done? Those are questions that as your state kind of configures the curriculum, as it kind of comes down to you as a district, those are questions that you would have, and they're really good questions. Here's another issue. And this is not necessarily for you, it's people who aren't here that you'll be working with, and that's the language. Grade 1. Students should apply the principle of transitivity measurement to make indirect comparisons, but they need not use this technical term. Trust me, a lot of really good 1st grade teachers have no idea what transitivity is, okay? Or it doesn't mean they forgot it. I mean, the last time they visited that word was when they took a math class and talked about the transitive property. So notions about that. In geometry in grade 1 are the following terms: right rectangular prisms, right circular cones, right circular cylinders. I had a math supervisor in California last summer came up to me and said, God, I got to review that stuff. I've forgotten what those are. So the issue around language as you work with teachers is really important. And by the way, this is my favorite. Understand a fraction 1/b is a quantity formed by one part when a whole is partitioned into b equal parts. Understand a fraction a/b is a quantity formed by a parts of size 1/b. I've actually seen 3rd grade teachers cry. Now I'm making that. But that's a load. We're talking about unit fractions. This is the problem. I love Bill McCallum, I love Jason Zimba, but they're mathematicians. No 3rd grade teacher talks that way. So there ought to be something that says, relax, these are just unit fractions, like 1/3 or 1/2 or whatever. Okay, that's what we mean. Why do you say that? But that's, see? Math educators can argue too. We can have arguments. That's bad language. You're confusing the hell out of a lot of people over something that is a fairly simple statement. I've actually had that conversation. But be wary as you work with your teachers. Come on. That's going to scare some people. And you could argue that there's more stuff than that. Yeah.
So this may be addressed later in the presentation, but this brings
probably
up
not. Go for it.
It brings up a really important question. Is there a resource that you're aware of that presents the grade level standards in grade level friendly language for students? I can or I will type statements.
Yeah. Kathy just bailed me out. I'm glad she said that. Somebody over here did. The progressions documents are probably a really good source for you. We'll talk about those in a minute, and she alluded to it earlier. But the progressions documents, only because you opened up this can of worms, the progressions documents are located, they're free, they're at the University of Arizona site. If you just Google Bill McCallum and progressions, they'll come up. And she showed them in her presentation. And there's the fractions are up there, and operations in algebraic thinking, number operations based 10. Not all of the content domains are there yet. But if you're a leader, or if you're just like in charge of the PD for my grade level, it's a worthy document for you to have, for you to read, and then decide, frankly, how much of that you want to put in front of your teachers. And I say that with great seriousness because in the specialist project that I run, we've used it. We've been all over the progressions documents, and we're, I don't know that faculty is ready for that yet. Or I might just do a little bit of it and so forth until, then when it's over, I'll give them the whole progressions thing for them to use and so forth. But it does unpack the language, which I think is your major issue. Here's another point of controversy, and maybe you've caught this. So in 5th grade, we talk about line plots, and in the 6th grade, we talk about dot plots. They're basically the same thing, two different representations. In one case, you might use an X to denote frequency. In another place, you use dot. This is a case where, I mean, to some extent, you know, people wanted to get the Common Core approved by the various states, and some states use dot plots on their state's assessments, and some states use line plots, and so in order to get, if you will, all the votes together, you know what, we'll do one in one grade and one in the other. But it's confusing teachers and others because, think about this, in many cases, this is an elementary grade activity, this is a middle grade activity, and somebody better be talking across these grade levels or across those building levels so that they know that the kids are basically representing frequency. In one level they might use X's, in another place they might use dots. So just, again, language related. We talked about the Common Core Plus challenges, and I think that's huge. Kathy talked a bit about RTI, and RTI kind of fits back into the prior statement, and that is that, you know, defining tier needs within a Common Core curriculum. What do we do about kids who don't have the prerequisites? And how are we dealing with intervention? And that varies around the country in terms of how we define the tiers and the amount of services and kinds of services available. But it's very opportune to, at minimum, consider such a challenge now. And by the way, the other side of that coin, if you will, is this kid. There are a whole lot of districts where moms and dads, in particular, are used to, oh, my kid's in the advanced track, and so therefore we're using the higher level book or whatever. Well, I'm not sure that's going to work now. You know, what are you going to do now? Look at that middle school curriculum, middle grade Common Core, and look at it's totally different in terms of the way it lays out. I live in Maryland, and I know people who I work with they're not sure what to do there. And again, the people that I allude to, the moms and dads, there's an expectation there. You know, what's this look like? What's going to happen with this, and so forth and so on. So that's a serious discussion beyond the building level for sure. Continuing teacher needs in terms of, you know, do your teachers know this is going on? And my guess is yes. So it's an awareness level, maybe it's awareness plus. Where do you start with your PD? When do you do this? Who's going to be involved? What's the stages of that? The implementation calendar. And I see this, again, very irregularly around, so I'll take a guess here. How many of you are implementing all grade levels, Common Core, in the coming year? How many of you doing K1 and 2? How many of you doing elementary only? How many of you have no clue? How many of you aren't sure? Okay, so there's a variety of things going on here. What often happens if it's a primary only implementation, which, by the way, often tends to be the first step. It just makes sense. For two reasons, by the way. A K1, 2 implementation first makes sense for a very pragmatic reason. There is no state-required test at those grade levels. So there's a no-fault clause. Try to do whatever we want, and nothing's going to happen. Seriously. So that's why K1 and 2 seems to be the first step for a lot of people. Having said that, and I've heard too many horror stories about, you know, the opening of your faculty meeting, well, you know, we're doing this in the Common Core K1 and 2, and somebody says, well, wait a minute, my kid's in grade 4. What's going to happen? Because when you implement this at the middle school level, he, she will have none of this. So I'm finding that people are like doing Common Core units across various levels to give some level of connection to that and so forth. That's a serious discussion in terms of implementation rollout, probably for people who are principals, curriculum directors, math supervisors, and so forth. Another serious question is, what about the curriculum materials? Okay, so I mean, point of conflict of interest for me. I'm an author with Envision, and I'm not going to say, because I never do this, that you ought to buy Envision because it's Common Core perfect. No published program is Common Core perfect. But what I think the questions you have to say is, how serious have you been, Pearson, with really thinking hard about the mathematical practices? How serious have you been, Pearson, or whomever, about the content that is Common Core? This is a work in progress for all of us. Nobody's going to get this right the first time. And what you want to hear, what am I putting pressure on you, Kirk, is for the publishers to be able to say, you know, we're your partner. You know, we're going to work. Here's what we've done under, you know, with authors and others, but you know, how can we help you essentially in this journey together? Because we all are together in this process. So that, I think, is an important question. Assessments. I'm going to do something real quick on that if we can. I want to go back to what Kathy said with a direct quote from the practices, because I think this is really important. A lack of understanding, and she, I think, really carried that heavily in her presentation, and I hope I made a similar point of emphasis, effectively prevents a student from engaging in the mathematical practices. So if kids aren't, you know, digging deep, then they can't really connect in an appropriate manner with the practices, which I think is important. You know, your own Common Core Plus, hands up. Our school district is aware of the Common Core and we have a plan, hands up. Okay, that's good. My building is aware and we have kind of a plan. I gave you kind of as a little wiggle room there. Okay, that's good. Our teachers are aware of the mathematical practices. Good. Are aware of the content domains and standards in the related language among them. That's the lightest, just so you know. Materials we talked about. How many of you have already, you have a professional development plan, something is rolling out. Good. How many of you are aware of PARC? Okay, you know exactly what that, how many of you know exactly what PARC's doing? You guys probably are writing PARC then. Okay, so Smarter Bounce, that's not you. So that's a pretty good pulse rate. Here's what, we mentioned this a couple times. Progressions documents, illustrative mathematics project also directed. Now we have a plant in the room who's directly connected. You're going to stand up and you're going to tell them. Tell them who you are.
I'm Donna Apple. I live in southeastern Massachusetts. I'm on the National Advisory Board for the Illustrative Mathematics Project. And I have told everyone that if you go into Illustrative Mathematics and you look at those tasks and use them with your curriculum, you'll get a real handle on the robustness and the rigor at which students should be enacting around the practices.
And if you just Google Illustrative Mathematics Project,
yes,
it'll come up. And they're tasks. I mean, there's stuff you can try with kids. And teachers from all over the country are really feeding into that. Is there anything more we should say about that, though?
There's going to be student work there, so
you
that
can,
you can actually
examine student work with your
around
PD.
there. All of these are on the, it's the IME back.arizona.edu. So when you go into the Institute for Mathematics Education at the University of Arizona, you'll see the progressions documents, the link to the Illustrative Mathematics and Bill McCallum's blog. So all of those resources that Skip's talked about.
Great. Okay, and then a couple more. Math Common Core Coalition is essentially the NCTM and the NCSM and the Association of Math Teacher Educators. That's a website. And we can make these slides available to you, by the way, so you can have all that. And then the Common Core Toolbox, which came out of the data center at University of Texas. And this is sort of interesting because what they've done, they've actually kind of blown it out and said this is what it might look like in grade 4, first marking period, so forth and so on. So that might be fun for you to take a look at. And I'm hedging on that for the following reason, and that is I actually think it's good when people like yourselves get together and you decide here's how we're going to roll this out. This is what our first marking is and so forth. Rather than saying, here's the template, we'll have to use this. That takes you out of the equation. And so I think you might want to use that as sort of to, well, you know, they're saying this, but we like what we decided or whatever, rather than just saying, here's the solution to the problem, because I think for far too long teachers have been taken out of the equation, and I think we ought to be an integral part of it. And this is just other stuff that you could question. I'm going to skip over that real quickly. This is what I see people doing, certainly doing the mathematical practices, certainly doing K through 2. As you know, there is no pre-K, and so I'm seeing some states author their own pre-K. Have you done that? You have?
Yeah.
No. Wait a minute.
Yeah, Massachusetts has pre-K.
Okay, well, some people were nodding no, so they must be from another state. Okay, fine. You didn't know it. Okay, so there are places, if you want to look at pre-K, including your own state. Certainly, I think the first start is the focal points, critical areas. Certainly, fractions and decimals, I think we've almost scared people with that, but it is really important. Beginning with professional development among understanding and representation, unpacking the stuff. Deciding your material needs, and that's everything from what manipulatives to what have you. I like particularly Valerie's comment here, the second one. It's important to remember that neither these standards nor any other single effort will be the silver bullet some mistakenly believe is out there. I mean, I think this is an amazing historical opportunity, and I think Kathy used the word opportunity as well. Challenge, sure, but also an opportunity, and one that we may not have again, so we've got to get this right, in my opinion. Anything that you wonder about before we take a break? Yes?
On your prior slide, one of your bullets referred to the beginning, the end, and the middle. And then we're talking a little bit more. No, the next one. There.
Yeah, what I mean there is K through 12. So most districts are moving K through 2 because of the notion that there's no state testing, so they can do the bond. But I say, we need to think about all of it and the rollout. And to wait all those years really puts the teachers at the upper levels at a disadvantage because the kids are not going to have that stuff as they come into their classroom. So some, if you will, formula to think about how can we do parts of implementation of the Common Core at maybe every grade level, or do full implementation K through 2 content domains 3 through 5, 1 in 6H. But a conversation about what that looks like, I think, is really important. Kathy?
Just a comment about that, because I get that question all the time. And one of the things that he and I haven't had a chance to talk about is that after you give your state test, look at the documents that identify what content is new at my grade, say at grade 5. And then transition by having lessons on those concepts that are totally new, just to get the kids thinking about it. We've done our test. That's what we're responsible for right now. That's one of the problems, is we're still responsible for the Massachusetts test now until Common Core comes. But if we wait until that last year, we're going to be behind. And so one of the things that we're trying to recommend is find lessons, and we happen to have some transition lessons, all the companies do, that are identifying those new areas that we need to be introducing now to get the kids thinking about it. And so that is a good way to start transitioning and getting the ball rolling a little bit, rather than waiting until the year up. Because then the teachers are going to be inundated with everything. And so if they have a little jump start with some of the key concepts that are new at each grade, at the end of the year, stepping up to the next year, you need to know this, stepping up, I think that is something to think about.
Very good. On that note, we'll take a break. Thank you very much.